Hey everybody, Ray here. You know, I like to make my own picture frames. Today I'm going to show you how to create a tool that will help you make picture frames quickly, easily, and accurately. If that's of interest to you, stick around. I'll show you how I do it. And don't forget, if you like this video, hit that like button and subscribe. So the first thing you'll need for this tool is a nice, straight, flat board. This one is about 38 inches. If I were to do this again, I'd make it a little bit longer. I would recommend about a 44-inch board. And it's about 4 inches high. And the reason you want it flat is because this is what you're going to be putting your frame against when you're making your cuts. So flatter is better. The second thing you'll need is to put a T-track on the top of that board. This is about a 3/4 inch board, so the T-track fits on here just perfectly. And then we're going to make a stop block that we can slide along this T-bar here, this T-track, so we can make repeated cuts at various lengths. So what you want to do is figure out how you're going to mount your stop block frame maker here to the back of your fence for your miter saw. Now, my particular miter saw, as you can see, already had a couple of holes in here, and that works out pretty well. So you put your wood up there, your lumber, and I've already have a 45-degree angle cut in here. When you first do it, it won't be a 45, it'll just be flat. And you'll want to put it up there to make sure that you can cut that 45, because you're going to want this 45 to be exactly where your saw blade comes down. So the first thing you want to do is to put that board where you're going to want it in order to get that 45 cut in there. And then take a clamp and just clamp that on there very tightly, exactly where you want it to sit. Now, as I said, my particular miter saw already has holes here, so I can come around to the back and drill through the hole on the miter fence out the other side of my wood here. I'll put 2 holes in here through my wood to make sure that it's anchored firmly when I want to use it. So for those of you who used my video about how to create an easy DIY stop block for your miter saw, will recognize this stop block. And all I've done is taken that stop block, which was mounted over here, and slid it over to the outside and put it here. So you might recognize this. If you do, you're ahead of the game. All you've got to do is a few adaptations to this, and it'll work just fine. If you haven't seen that video, I will reference that for you, and you can take a look at it. I highly recommend that you go out there and look at that. So once you've drilled your holes from the back out through your board here, then what you're going to want to do is countersink that hole on the front. So when you put your screw through, it's flat and the wood is not going to rub against it. And then I just use a couple of wing nuts to tighten that down in the back of the fence. Now, as I said, mine already has the 45 cut in there. If you're making this from scratch and you don't have the 45, once you've got this anchored down in there, this would be the time to cut that out to be a 45-degree angle, right there. So you can see why, once that's in there, it's going to be perfectly aligned to where your saw is going to cut right at that same place every time you use this stop block. Now, as I said, I've used wing nuts on the back side here to hold this, but once it's on there and you make sure you have it where you want, I go ahead and tighten that up with a screwdriver against that wing nut just to make sure that this is not going to move at all. It is at this point then you'll want to go ahead and mount your T-track. In my case, I've got 36 inches of T-track, and you can slide it out this way before you mount it, wherever you think it's appropriate. Mine is probably pretty close. I doubt I'd ever be making anything that small in here. So if you did a 44-inch board, you could easily slide that over this way. But a 36-inch T-track worked pretty well for me. Now what you'll want to do next is to make the actual stop lock that will fit on top of your T-track. And to do that, I just used the same wood that I used to make the bar, and I glued a second piece on there. And the second piece is glued such that when I set it on the T-track, it sits nice and flush against that bar. So you'll glue those pieces together and make sure you mark here appropriately so that when you drill your holes, it's going to fit on there and leave everything nice and flush. Once you've done that, you can insert your bolts into your T-track, and then all you have to do is put your knobs on there, screw it down, and then you're ready to adjust this stop lock to whatever size frame that you're making, and you can make repeated cuts. Now, how do we use that tool over there that we've made? I'm going to show you how to set it up such that you can make repeated cuts and make multiple frames at the same time. Now, the first thing I do is, in this particular case, this is a floating frame, so it has both a back and a side. And I know that I need some frames for a 24 by 30 painting and a 24 by 36 painting. And to do a floating frame, that means to the outside corner of my frame, it's going to have to be 25.5 inches. So I leave 1/4 inch around there for the float effect. So I've got these little tools that I created, these little jigs. This is exactly what I want for a 24-inch picture, which gives me 25.5 inches. And I lay them out on the board. And you can see that I can do a top, a bottom, and one side out of an 8-foot board. And I'm only going to waste about 6 inches here of wood. So I highly recommend that you make these little jigs. These are just little 1/4-inch jigs. I made this out of a piece of lattice, it looks like. One of them's made out of a little piece of 1/4-inch plywood. But it gives you a tool to try to make sure that you can cut your wood the most efficient way that you can without a lot of waste. So I'm going to mark these. The first thing that I will do is I will cut these at a 90 degree here, and then we'll set up our jig over there, and I'll show you how to use that. All right, so your next step here is to set your little stop lock up here to be where you want it. So you take your, however long you want to cut that, in this case it's the 25.5 inches, you set that against your stop lock bar here, and what you want to do is make sure that you are lined up perfectly flush with this angle here. So that feels really good. So once you have that lined up where you want it, then you'll come back here and slide your stop lock up to the other end, and then tighten that down. Come back here and check. We're still perfectly flush there. So when you set your frame on here to cut your 45, it's going to be exactly to the length that you want it. Now once you have your board lined up against your stop lock, you're ready to go ahead and cut that first angle. I suggest, if you can, that you clamp your work to the bar of your stop lock here. The reason for that is, if you're cutting a 90-degree angle, the saw is pulling the board, but it's pulling it against the fence, so it really doesn't have any way to go. If you're cutting at a 45-degree angle, it wants to pull the board this way because the blade is turning and it wants to pull the board. So you can hold it with your hand, you have to hold it very tightly, and I like to supplement that with a clamp to make sure that that doesn't move, because any variation in that angle is going to make your fit less accurate. All right, we've cut our first side. Now you want to make sure that you flip it over so that you cut the second angle in such a way that it's going to be inside like this one is. All right, so we've clamped our board back on here. We've made sure that our angles are cut the way we want them to cut. We'll go ahead and cut this second board. And remember, I used a clamp. And there's your cut. So by using that stop block technique, we've ensured that both of these, which in this case are the top and the bottom, are exactly the same. And that's really what you want to pay attention to. And the angles are cut perfectly. So when I join these together, I get a really nice smooth angle in there with no gaps. So that stop block works great. I'm going to go back and cut some more of these 25.5 inches because that's what I need. Using that process I've shown you, I cut out 5 frames in about a half hour. And it was very simple. I just set it to cut all my tops and bottoms, which were the 25.5 inch frames. I did all those first, and then I did 3 of them. I needed 30 inch for the sides, so I reset the jig, cut all the 30 inch. Then for the larger ones, I needed the 36 inch. So I reset and I cut all those 4 sides to the 36 inch. Took about a half hour once I got started. So as I said, we made 5 frames in about a half hour. That little tool I showed you how to make really pays dividends if you want to make a few picture frames. And they fit together very nicely, very accurately. All we have to do now is to glue them together and mount our paintings. And they're going to look great. If you'd like to know how to make the floating frames themselves, there's a separate video to that I will reference. But they're a little more difficult than regular just flat frames, but they're not that hard. And I think if you watch my video, you'll figure out how to do it. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you thought it was, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.